So you can hear, and it's good. All right. We received 2 messages from students that I want to answer. Let's see. Maybe I'll do this one first. Okay, this person has 2 questions. The first is a quote, and he wants to know what a certain phrase means. It's about American politics. Okay? I'll read you the quote. Never mind the Democrats' reason. By hanging Wall Street around Republicans' necks and by reviving the immigration controversy, with a great deal of help from the state of Arizona, Democrats will win out. Maybe not in 2010, as off-year electorates tend to skew older and whiter, but certainly by 2012, when President Obama stands for re-election. This is an extract from Mona Charon's article, RGEO Stepping on a Landmine. I think it's supposed to be GOPers. Are GOPers stepping on a landmine? The question is, could you break down and explain the phrase, as off-year electorates tend to skew older and whiter? By the way, Alessandro, is it possible for the students to see this quote in writing? Is that the kind of thing you can do? No. Okay, because I'm afraid they won't understand it anyway. All right, so I'm going to do just the phrase the student asked about. As off-year electorates tend to skew older and whiter. Okay, the whole quote was talking about the fact that the Democrats will probably not win the elections for Congress in November of 2010. But they will probably get President Obama re-elected in 2012. One reason that is given is because off-year electorates tend to skew older and whiter. Now, the first question is, what's off-year? In the United States, we consider that the presidential election, which takes place once every 4 years, is the big election year. Everybody comes out to vote for the president. And at the same time, we also vote for Congress. And so on a presidential election year, you get a big voter turnout and you vote for Congress and the president. But in our Constitution, we have the opportunity to vote for Congress every 2 years. So the 2 years when there is no presidential election is off year. And then 2 years later, it's a presidential year. 2 more years, off year again. And off year elections generally don't pull as many voters. Usually it's a small fraction of the voters in an off-year election. Now, the electorate is the people who vote. So there is a large electorate in a presidential year, but a small electorate in an off-year election. And then the electorates tend to skew older and whiter. Now, tend to means it kind of goes that way, but it's not a scientific fact. It's just an observation. We think it kind of works this way. So that is a very soft word, not strong. So what he's doing is he's expressing a general opinion. Skew. If something is straight, dead on straight, it's called true. True. T-R-U-E. That means straight, dead on, perfectly straight. If it veers off to the side, one side or the other, we call it skewed. It's a deviation from center. Okay, center might be an average. And then the skew would be if there's a significant deviation or branch off of average. Now, it's used as a verb here. If the electorate skews older and whiter, that means that there is a disproportionate number of older people voting and white people voting as opposed to young people and people of color. So the assertion here is that in an off-year election, the people voting, by and large, are going to be more of the older people than in an election year, and more of the white people than in a presidential election year. Now, and then that would compare to what they would say is average for America. So they're suggesting that this does not represent the majority of Americans. It is skewed results toward old people and white people. That is the literal meaning of this. But there is more under the surface of this comment. First off, the whole quote, to me, suggests that the writer of the quote, the author, wants the Democrats to win. The author is apologizing for the fact that in the off-year election coming up in 2010, she expects the Republicans to take Congress. That's because the American public is very unhappy with the Democratic regime which is in place right now. And the Democrats know that. And so they expect to lose in 2010. And this quote is excusing that as a skewed result. They're saying it is not the will of the majority of people. It is a skewed result reflecting disproportionately the desires of old people and white people. The Democratic Party is thought to be the party of the young and also the party of minorities, like black people and other Hispanics, people of color. So, to suggest that it's skewed in the direction of older people and whiter people is to suggest that it is the old people and the white people who don't like the current regime, the Obama administration and the Democratic Congress, majorities in the houses of Congress. Underneath even that, I personally believe, I feel sure, there is a disdain for old people and white people. I happen to know that these groups are not respected highly by Democrats. The Democrats love youth, and they consider old to be not progressive and stuck in the past and rich and holding money and business, and they don't like that. They want to take the money away from the older generation. They call them the Gray Panthers, the gray-haired Panthers, because we had the Black Panthers, were a terrorist group of black people in the 1960s. Well, now they call the old people the Gray Panthers to suggest that they're a menace to society, that they're dangerous. That's what the Democrats say. Also, it is a slur against white people, as though white people are the oppressors of the masses. So this is pro-minority, anti-white, and anti-older. And so the entire quote is suggesting that the reason the Democrats will lose in 2010 is because, in part, an off-year election is skewed toward a minority of the population, primarily old people and white people, who do not hold the views of the majority, but in the presidential year of 2012, the views of the majority, which is in favor of the Democratic Party, will prevail and the Democrats will win. That's what this quote is saying. Long answer, but this little phrase really carried a lot of content on many levels. Okay, there's another question. Hopefully it'll be much faster, but this tells you a little bit about American politics and the society here, which maybe you're interested in. Okay, same student asked another question. He was reading an article by Chelsea Schilling and came across this quote. FBI investigation notes reveal that Acorn, that's an organization, was working for the Democratic Party and told employees not to talk to the FBI, to cause confusion on Election Day, and to go poverty pimpin' for votes. What does poverty pimpin' mean? Is it slang? Alessandro, do you know what ACORN stands for? All right, why don't you find that out, because I think it's a very liberal organization. What's ACORN, just for the students?
Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now.
Of community? Organizations
for reform
now.
And by the way, Margarita, the other student who suggested that you should read the poem by Elizabeth Bishop
is on now? Good. We're going to read a poem in just a minute from a student, and I'm glad she's on. Welcome to the session. Okay, so ACO, don't need that one, sorry. RN, ACORN. The acronym ACORN was familiar to me. It's well known as an ultra-liberal organization in America. And from the name of it, I see it's an association for community organizations for reform now. So, Association of Community Organizations, you know that in the United States we have the freedom to organize in order to do good. So we can have orphanages, or we can have private schools, or we can have projects to clean up the neighborhood, or we can have associations to fight pollution, or to provide young people with a place to go after school. So all of these kinds of activities can receive money from the government and from private people in order to do good in the society voluntarily. The concept is we have 1,000 points of light. That was Ronald Reagan, I think, who spoke of the 1,000 points of light. And it's for private charity. And apparently, I believe, community organizations for reform. This is a lobby group, I think, that lobbies the government to make changes in laws and give money to appropriate organizations that they want supported. Okay, now, let me read the quote again, and then we'll talk about what poverty pimpin' is. I was reading an article by Chelsea Schilling and came across this quote. FBI investigation notes reveal that Acorn was working for the Democratic Party and told employees not to talk to the FBI and to cause confusion on Election Day and to go poverty pimpin' for votes. What does poverty pimpin' mean? Is it slang? Okay, first of all, a lobby group is supposed to be non-partisan, which means it's not supposed to be Democratic or Republican. If it's getting tax monies, it's supposed to be neutral. Okay, so the fact that they were working for the Democratic Party is in itself a violation of ethics, and a legal violation probably as well. Then the fact that they told employees not to talk to the FBI means they don't want to assist in investigations. And to cause confusion on Election Day means they are disrupting the electoral process. And to go poverty pimpin' for votes. Poverty pimping. Now, a pimp is a man who basically owns women who are prostitutes. And the prostitutes work and the money goes to the pimp. Okay? So a pimp, literally, is a man who makes profit off of selling the bodies of women who he controls. Now, poverty pimping is an analogy to being a owner of prostitutes. Basically, the Democratic Party, right after the United States Civil War that ended slavery in the South, this is 1866 or so, in the 1800s, all of the black slaves were freed in the South of the United States by Abraham Lincoln. And the South was utterly destroyed by the war. All of its institutions were disrupted. Most of its men were killed between the ages of 16 and 60. There were very few white men left. And you had lots and lots and lots of black slaves who were illiterate and uneducated, newly freed. And the Democratic Party sent, well, maybe it was the Republicans, I don't know. Somebody sent people down into the South to sign up voters. And that was the beginning of this poverty pimping. Basically, they're trying to sign up voters, promising them government money and government assistance, and we'll pass any law you want, just become a Democrat. Okay? Now, actually, I have to confess, I'm not sure. It might have been Republicans who did that in 1860. But in recent years, in fact, I think it was Republicans, because the Southern Democrats were very pro-slavery. But anyway, in recent years, the last 40, 50 years, the Democratic Party has been the party of the poor blacks. And it's also been the party, well, it's been the party of all poor people, especially minorities. And they sign up voters with the understanding that they will make laws that are favorable to giving government money, handouts, to poor people. And the party profits from the needs of the poor, because the poor are so desperate for something that they will vote for the Democratic Party. Now, in addition to politicians benefiting from the poverty of the people are poor, so they'll vote for you because you promised them stuff. Also, certain organizations benefit from poverty. Organizations that exist to relieve the distress of the poor. So, I myself was employed by one of these organizations 30 years ago, so I know for sure that this is what happens. Basically, some smart person writes a grant proposal, a paper that says, if you give me $10,000, I will set up a program to assist the poor. And they send that paper to the government, and the government stamps it, approves it, sends the money. And for a year, you have that money to use in the program that you detailed in your paper. And at the end of the year, you have to renew your request for more money. And so at the end of the year, you write in and ask for a renewal. And once you're getting the money, every year it's easier to get it again and again. And you are employing some people who are supposed to be working for the community, but there's no accountability. And so as long as you can demonstrate that the need exists for your organization, the government will keep giving you money. So there is no incentive to relieve the problem. Because if you succeed in relieving the problem, there will be no reason for your organization to exist anymore. So this phrase suggests anybody who has reason to benefit from the poverty of the poor. So they don't want the poor to be saved or to be relieved of their necessity, because if the poor were fixed, they would lose some benefit. So they are benefiting from the misfortune of the poor, just like a pimp benefits from the misfortune of the woman who is having to sell herself, and he benefits. Well, the Democrats are benefiting by telling the poor, vote for us, we'll take care of you. But they have no intention of taking care of them, because then they would be more well-to-do and they would start voting Republican. So they would lose the votes. So I hope that's clear. That's the meaning of this phrase, poverty pimping. And it's well known to be an activity of the Democratic Party in America right now, because they're the party of the poor. And the Republicans are more the party of the small business owners and people who have money and investments to protect. The old white people, supposedly. Okay, one last thing, and then we're moving straight into the book. A student sent a poem and invited me to read it and make some comments. And I'm happy about this because the whole point of this class is to talk about the fact that human beings have a unique experience of reality that happens in the realm of the imagination and is not subject to weights and measures, the weights and measures of science. Science claims that the only reality is that which can be measured. But we say, no, there is a huge reality which we as human beings have the ability to perceive and experience and validate through our speech and our narrative and share with others in a community. And that this world, the invisible world of experience, is the major part of reality. That which we can measure is a very small part of reality, far from being all that there is. So, when we read a poem and talk about it, I am having an image of things in my mind that has been suggested by the author who has a different experience, and somehow a connection is happening, and it's bringing up ideas for me which are different from the ideas of the author, and then through the interaction another thing comes up, a third thing, and that I share with you, and it triggers ideas, and then you share, and we contribute to the great stream of literary knowledge, of knowledge of the world, which can only be perceived by higher order thinking and higher order language, and language which is not very precise. Not very precise. Because if it was precise, it wouldn't be possible for me to connect it to memories of my own that are a little bit different, but also the same. So that I bring up this memory and put it with this one, and it interacts to make a new idea. Now, I do want to tell you before I read the poem, last week we were talking about abstraction. As part of abstraction, is a process by which we take a percept, something we see, raw data, or something we feel, or a concept, a single idea. Like, for example, I see a cat, a living cat. So I'll call it a cat. And then I abstract from it an intelligible form, an idea that is not the fur ball in front of me. Okay, I abstract something else and it comes out as a form. An intelligible form, a concept in my mind, okay, that I can work with. Okay, now, there's another thing that I learned in my study of formal logic, which we studied in our homeschool. So see if I can remember it. If you start out with a proposition, such as, all men are mortal. We talked about this before. Mortal. And a second proposition. Socrates is a man. Okay. Both of these are first premises, facts, if you will. And then in our mind, we unite these two. We put them together, and something happens. In the interaction, something happens, and it gives birth to a new proposition. The new proposition is Socrates must have been mortal. Okay? This process is called syllogism. This thing is called a deductive inference. Deductive inference. And in the logic book, it said that this process of deriving a syllogism by means of deductive inference was a way that the quantity of truth grows in our mind. It is a way of producing a new truth, new information from old information. So if you begin with known premises, and then interact with them and make your deductive inference, you come up with something you didn't know before, and you have added to knowledge. So this is a creative process. In another sense, when I read a poem and it invokes, I experience the author's ideas, and it invokes ideas in myself. Here it's like the author's ideas, and then ideas in myself, and then they all come together somehow by some process, some creative process within my heart and soul and mind, and then I come out with thoughts. Those thoughts represent a creative response. Something new has been born, something brand new that I never thought before, and I never heard before, and you maybe have heard or not heard, depending on whether anyone ever said these same things. But this is the process by which the commerce of ideas produces new knowledge for the human race. And we are afraid that by suppressing this kind of activity and failing to respect it, it's impeding the flow of progress in human knowledge and human experience and philosophy. So, I have to say that I am not a literary critic in terms of an expert by any means. I could never be hired by a college to teach poetry. I never even studied poetry. So, what I am is an ordinary person on the street who knows nothing about poetry. And when I read this, I'm going to share with you. In fact, I've only skimmed it very quickly when we picked it off the computer half an hour ago. So I don't know this poem. So I'm going to share with you my first reaction. So the poem will be our first premise. I'll read it out loud. And then I'll share with you what comes out of my heart. And then maybe I'll do some interacting, come up with some more ideas. If you have any ideas, please chat them to us or email them to us. Feel free. Alessandro is on the computer right now, and this can be a dialogue, not just a monologue. But at least we have two souls involved before you even start typing. So here is the poem that the student recommended. One moment.
I'm going to post the link for the poem in the chat.
Okay, Alessandro is posting a link for the poem so you can read it as well as hear. Okay. The poem is entitled One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day, accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing further, losing faster. Places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love. I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. When I first started the poem, half an hour ago, when I first glanced at it, I had 2 responses. One was to talk about losing. Losing. Loser. Kids go like this. Loser. Like they put an L for loser, and then maybe they'll point at you, loser, on your forehead, call you a loser, someone who is never going to get anywhere in the world. Also, it's funny, on the way over here, I was listening to a radio program. It was a really good radio drama, and it was about I think it was called Sore Loser. Sore loser. Sore loser is something we call a person when they don't lose gracefully. So if I'm playing chess or checkers or some game with somebody and I win and he loses and he throws the board on the table and stomps off saying, "It wasn't fair," he's a sore loser. And in the radio drama, there was some really funny lines. There was this guy who was really, really smart, and he kept losing at chess to kind of a really stupid guy. And he got so upset, he almost lost his mind. He started using bad grammar, and then he said, "If this continues, I'm going to think the earth revolves around the sun." And then a stupid person said, "The earth does revolve around the sun." And then he went, "Ah!" and ran off. He was literally going crazy because he was losing. So when I started reading this, I thought of that. I thought of losing a game, being a sore loser, or maybe being fat and ugly and stupid, so people thought you'd be a loser and nobody would, you'd never have any significance in the world. I was thinking those thoughts. Then, as it got on, it seemed less light and trivial. The thoughts I was having were more effervescent. They were kind of funny and happy, and is this a comical poem, kind of like the one from last week about the naming of cats? That was sort of humorous. I thought this was going to be humorous, and that's what I expected. But then, as it went on, it began to get more poignant. Poignant. It's a very unusual construction in English, pronounced poignant. There's no G sound for us, poignant. Poignant means touching and sad, deeply touching. So something which is poignant will hurt you in the heart and bring out a few tears very frequently. It began to become poignant to me, especially, at first, The art of losing isn't hard to master. And I was thinking, yeah, it's not too hard. It's okay. We can learn to be a good loser. It's not a disaster. Lose something every day. Lost keys for your door? No problem. An hour that you wasted? It's not a disaster. That's all very lighthearted. Yeah, sure. We all need to chill out. Chill out. That means cool it. Just relax. No problem there. The art of losing isn't hard to master. To master means to become very good at, to become skilled. So in the art of losing, being a good loser, it's something we can learn, okay? Practice losing further, losing faster. That begins to sound kind of worse to me. Places, names, where it was you meant to travel. None of these bring disaster. I related to that because I am 49 years old and I forget stuff all the time. I can lose names. I can forget my best friend's name. I can forget where I'm going. Driving here today, I almost went the wrong way because I forgot where I was going. It's because of age. It says it's not a disaster. Okay, so I'm becoming forgetful. Alzheimer's. You know Alzheimer's? How do you spell Alzheimer's? That's a disease that old people begin to forget. I was worried, but it says it's not a disaster. Okay. I lost my mother's watch. Okay. But then it says, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 beloved houses. Ooh, that's where it started to get poignant. Because a beloved house, to lose a house, is a disaster in the United States. You only lose a house if something goes wrong. Bankruptcy, financial disaster, illness, death. That causes you to lose your house. It is a disaster. And these were beloved houses. You do not just sell a beloved house. If you lose it, it's bad. It breaks your heart. And this was 3 beloved houses. So this is becoming a little bit worse to me. And then I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. The only people who could say this would be kings. I think of the King of England. Oh well, we were the biggest empire in the world for a couple of 100 years, and now I lost a city here, a realm there. Oh, the continent of North America, lost that. Oh well, miss it, but it's not a disaster. Great Britain, England, they still exist. Little island over there, no longer an empire. That's kind of big. But that really didn't hit me too hard. Because I'm not a king and never will be, so I'm not going to lose any continents. Then came the kicker. Even losing you. The joking voice. A gesture I love. This is where the tear begins to come out for me. Because I have lost someone recently. I shan't have lied. It's evident. The art of losing is not too hard to master, though it may look like a disaster. I'll share one more thing, very personal. Although Olavo's son Pedro was present when this happened. And this is the last thing that strikes me from this poem. In my house, when someone has a birthday, we have a tradition. At the dinner table, we usually have lots of people at our dinner table because I have 4 kids and we have many teenage friends who love to stay at our house and be part of our family. So they're all there too. So we could have 12 people around the table. And what we do is we go around and each person has to say what they respect or admire or like about the birthday person, what they love about the birthday person. And we go around and we keep going around and saying these things until somebody can't think of any more. And you're not allowed to repeat. So when somebody can't think of anything more, that person loses the game and has to do the dishes. So everybody wants to think of things to say. And also, you can't just make up something that's not true. For example, if they were speaking of me, they couldn't say, I like how strong you are when it comes to moving rocks. It's not true. I'm not strong at all when it comes to doing heavy lifting. So if they said something false, everybody would go, no, thumbs down. And then if they can't come up with something true, they have to do the dishes. So we were playing that game a few months ago. It was February, and it was my husband's birthday. And he was there, and we were going around and around the table. And my husband was at that time in the process of leaving our family because he is depressed and doesn't want to live with us anymore. And so he was trying to get his finances in order for him to be able to move out of the house. And so we were going around saying those things which we admired about him. And when it came to my turn, what came to my heart to say, I was unable to say because I started to cry. But I wanted to say it so very much that I had to write it on a piece of paper and hand it to him because I couldn't speak because I was crying. And what I wrote was something to the effect of, what I like about him is that I think I said something to the effect of, life is not worth the living without him. But I didn't really mean that. What I really meant was he gives meaning to life for me in our home. So what I felt was, when I clean the house, I'm doing it for him. When I cook, I'm doing it for him. When I even raise the children to be godly and intelligent, responsible adults, I'm doing it in his name for his glory. You know, his son or daughter will be a fine person to his credit. I'm doing it for him. And if he leaves, it's like nothing has meaning. And so I could only write it. And for me, I can lose a house, and it's not a disaster. Of course, keys my memory. But the last paragraph is the hard one. So that's how I react to that poem. And I thank whoever sent it, which I think her name is Mary Elena, right? Thank you, Mary Elena, for sending it. I really enjoyed reading that poem and sharing my thoughts with you. And if anybody has other pieces of literature that they would like to share in this forum that speak to you in a special way, feel free to send these in and we can talk about them. That is the kind of thing that we can do because we're human and because we do have an intellect and because we really aren't machines. And it's not true that the only reality is that which can be measured. There's a lot of reality that can be shared in a community of people besides that. So, if you have any comments, send them now. Other than that, we'll start right back into our book. But first, I'd like to get a Kleenex and blow my nose. I'll be right back. Where's the Kleenex? Do you have a Kleenex or napkin? Okay, let's see if we can get into the book and get me out of my mood. I'm now in a bad mood. Not a bad mood, but a sad mood. And when I get in these sad moods, it's hard for me to get out of them. However, discussing a good book is a great way to do it. Okay, we are on page 31, I think. Is that right? Yeah. No. 33. 33. Yep. 33. And we are in the middle of a paragraph. The paragraph begins, one has the power. But before we start there, I want to back up a little bit to remind everybody, what we're talking about. Whenever I start to prepare for this class, I always back up a couple of pages and reread all the context and then move into the next section. And you might want to do that too. You might want to, maybe one time in the week, if you aren't already doing this, try to read this book by yourself. And it'll be interesting to see how much you can do totally on your own. And I'd be interested if you would email and tell me how easy it is for you or how difficult. That way we can see if this class is helping you. So, anyway, let's back up a little bit. Okay. In the quote on page 33, which begins to say, "This here read, I must already have abstracted from my immediate relational perceptions and stood back from them and assessed them so as to be able to place a new occurrent into the class of like, though differing particulars into which it fits. Only then can I tag it as read. Not that I have in my memory a series of particular color images, such as Hume suggested. What I have is the power of bringing each new particular to the bar of judgment according to a principle." Okay, that's the sentence I wanted to get to. Okay, what we have is a power to bring each new occurrent to the bar of judgment to compare it to something. Okay, to compare it according to a principle. And we spoke last week of cats, dogs, rabbits, hamsters, and any new animal is brought to this bar to find out if it's a cat, or if it's a dog, or if it's a hamster, or if it's a rabbit. We carry these categories in our mind, not as a series of pictures, that we can compare it to, nor even as a clearly articulatable concept. It's something that is not easy to pin down, but we just know whether this is a cat or a rabbit. Okay, we can't really clearly articulate why. We don't compare it to a series of pictures, but we have these concepts in our mind, and we have the power to sort out the world according to categories which are stored in our mind. Lots and lots of categories. And there is a corresponding verbal interface where there is a word for every category. There is a word to describe every characteristic of any given example in a perception. The words correspond to realities, and the words form the interface between the outside reality and our soul, which is doing the experiencing. Okay? We are a soul in a body. Part of the body is the brain. Part of the brain is the verbal system of categorizing. We put a sound with a concept, and the concept is something that exists in the real world. Okay? So, beginning with the paragraph, one has the power. One has the power because, in that way which defies clear and logical statement, and defies deliberate thought, unless in a creative writer's use of language, one belongs to a community. I'm going to remind you the core thought is, one has the power because one belongs to a community. That is something we should think about. That is something that should go deep and interact in our minds and bring up new truth. Because it's a concept that's not immediately accessible. One has the power because one belongs to a community. One has the power of differentiating, bringing things to the bar of judgment in a way that defies clear and logical statement and defies deliberate thought. It's just automatic, except in a creative writer's use of language, because one belongs to a community. The standard, though personal, the standard, dog, cat, hamster, rabbit, though personal, I do understand it within my own heart, within my own mind, though personal, apprehended personally, as in, and of the nature of the real, and applied personally, but not as a matter of decision, is not merely personal. So it is personal, but it's not only personal. If it were only personal, then it would exist inside my heart alone, and it would not have a direct correspondence to reality. Okay? It would be only subjective. Okay? But these things are not really subjective. They really have external reality. They are apprehended by my personal eyeballs. They are categorized personally in my own brain, which if you knocked me on the head, I could lose the ability to process, and then I wouldn't be able to recognize if something is a rabbit or a hat or something else. So I do apply it personally. But it is not only personal. It's not just me choosing to say that this is black. It's not black, clearly. If you can see color, you can see that it is green, not black. I don't have the choice to decide to call this black. It's not my decision. I'm only allowed to call it green because its green nature is outside of me, and is decided by someone else. Whoever originally called this wavelength, or whatever you call that, green. This pigment, this hue, green. Okay, so it's not merely personal. It is a product of immemorially collaborative creativity. And we stopped last week with a discussion of Adam naming the animals creatively. Now, since Adam, there have been thousands of years, if you believe in Adam at all, which I actually do think there was probably an Adam and Eve. But anyway, there's been thousands of years. And during those years, different societies have chosen to name things differently. The English people named this over the years green. The Spanish named it what? Verde? What did the Portuguese name it? Verde. I'm sure the Chinese have a very different name for this color. However, because those arbitrarily selected words correspond to a reality that has independent existence, they all refer to the same reality. Translation is possible. It's because of the fixed reference in the real world that it is possible for us to decode other languages and to translate. There is a true, actual connection between these value words and independent reality in the real world outside of the seer. However, there is a community that grows up over the years, their language develops, and by common collaborative creative effort, they come up with words to define shared realities, shared experiences. And then they all agree on that word. I recently read a book, not very recently. It's a children's book. We used it for my son when he was learning to read, and the book was called Frindle. It was the story, very nice book. If you want to read a very easy English book for a learner who's beginning, this is a good choice. It's about a boy who is rebellious and a troublemaker, if I'm remembering correctly, in his class. And he decides that he will call this a frindle instead of a pen. Or maybe it was a pencil. But whatever it was, he called it a frindle. Now, his English teacher was a very smart woman, very excellent teacher. And she wanted to give the boy and the class a lesson on the collaborative growth of language by creative persons cooperating. So, knowing human nature, what she did was she came down hard on the student and said, "No, that's not a word. You may not call it a frindle. Use the correct word, pen." And he was so upset, he rebelled, and he wanted to call it frindle all the more. But not only he, but all the students in the class organized themselves to annoy this teacher by calling it a frindle. Then the teacher complained to the principal that disorder and chaos was reigning in her classroom. It was an all-out revolt and mutiny, and it was all around this word that the gangs were using. And the principal said, "Nobody is allowed to use that word." And as a result, all the students in the whole school started to use it, and they were punished. They had to stay after school and write lines 100 times. I will call a pen a pen. But they changed it, and all the students in the school wrote, I will call a frindle a frindle. And the entire school turned it in. And there was a student in the school who wrote for the newspaper of the school. And she wrote about what was happening in the school. And then her father read it, and he sent it to the local newspaper of the city, who published it. And the next thing you know, TV cameras came to document the event of the students rebelling against the oppressive teachers. And then it began to take off like wildfire throughout the city, and then it became national news throughout the country. So all this happened over time. And several years later, I believe the boy had grown up and gone, to college or medical school. I mean, he was a successful man. He received, I know. Wait a second. I think what happened was the teacher wrote him a letter when he was a little boy and sealed it in an envelope and said, I may send this to you someday. Maybe yes, maybe no. So 15 years later, when the boy was grown up, he received the letter dated 15 years earlier from the teacher. And in it was a page torn out of the dictionary. And in the letter, it explained how words come about. And how words basically are originated by a creative individual, and then they're picked up by other collaborative individuals who then start a movement, and then by common consent, the word is brought into the lexicon of the language and becomes standard usage. And so in the most recent Webster's dictionary, the word frindle was printed as an alternative word for pen, pencil, or writing utensil, slang. And she had ripped out the page and folded it up and put it in the letter and mailed it to him. And so, great book, really. Very small, written for children to read. But it talks about this, that we have the power to name things because of a community that has cooperated and communicated and agreed on names for things and used those names cooperatively over the years. And within the community, these things have their meaning. Now, so far we've talked only about generic things like green or cat, but let us read on. Okay, now we're beginning the new section that we hadn't read before. It's already 7:30, but we'll do some. The kind of, all right, I'm beginning in the middle of the paragraph, beginning with the words, the kind of value judgment, page 33. The kind of value judgment immediately in question in the paragraph from the knower and the known, which I have just quoted, is at the mathematical logician's end of the spectrum. So the kind of value judgment they're talking about was, is it a cat or a dog? Is it a rabbit or a hamster? Is it red or green? That is at the mathematical logician's end of things. It's essentially, it's a value judgment, but it could be theoretically confirmed by science, by measurements, by DNA, by some kind of an instrument that measures color. Okay, so it's at the mathematical end of the spectrum where words can be explicit and binary. Okay? That's what we have been talking about, even though Marjorie Green points out that red could mean any infinite variety of different shades of red. Yet still, red isn't green, and it's on the mathematical logician's end of things. You could have a mathematical language with a word for red, and that would work. Okay? So, that kind of value judgment, immediately in question, in the paragraph from the knower and the known, which I've just quoted, is at the mathematical logician's end of the spectrum. The end tactically selected as representative by Russell for his Cartesian purpose. Tactically selected. Tactical makes you think of a battle, a war, where the general makes tactical moves. Is it better to hit the enemy from the side, or to hit the enemy head on, or is it better to drop back so that you can get behind him? These are tactical moves. And when he says that Russell has tactically selected this end of the linguistic spectrum as representative for his purposes, Russell wanted to make a language that could correspond to mathematical logic. And so he wanted to exclude all words and concepts which were subjective or secondary, and consider this portion of the spectrum as representative of all reality. This is all we need. Everything real can be conclusively, explicitly explained with these words. This was Russell's strategy to disseminate and impose his philosophical worldview on the rest of us. Okay, this is the Cartesian dualism, the idea that only the material world is real, and only that which can be scientifically defined, mathematically defined, is real. Okay, so Russell tactically chose that end of the spectrum to be representative of all reality for his Cartesian purpose. The discipline that maintains the standards of science has its existence in a specializing community, the intellectual devotion of which is a special and professional morality. But Andreski would do well to ponder this. And then he quotes again from Marjorie Green. Let's look at that sentence. The discipline that maintains the standards of science. Okay, now, do you remember Andreski was very upset that his fellow sociologists were not adhering to reasonable and agreed upon standards for sociology? And he was trying to prove that in the absence of really philosophically having any standards or any basis for standards in his worldview. Okay. Now, again, we're speaking of these standards that all the sociologists should have been expected to follow, but they were not. For example, let me speak of one similar thing that I am aware of. I have a friend who is a PhD engineer. He teaches engineering at some university, and he was speaking of the scientific community at his college and how he did not trust that they would only publish true research. He said that if they could get away with it, that means if they could do this and not be found out, not be discovered, and not be punished. If they could get away with it, means escape detection, they would publish research that they knew was not true. He said he was sure that that happened a lot, and that people believe what the scientists say. For example, we were speaking of the theory of evolution at the time, and he was saying that you cannot rely on everything that a scientist puts out, because if they can get away with it, they will publish things they know aren't true. This is a violation of standards of scientific integrity, which all scientists are supposed to abide by. In the same way, judges who sit on court are supposed to be honorable and honest and not tell lies. This is a standard which is supposed to apply to judges. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. There are certain standards that apply in a given community. Okay? The discipline that maintains the standards of science. So that's the discipline to not publish lies or unfounded research. That would be one discipline. Another discipline of science that holds science together is that you rely on observation and factual proof, supposedly, before you publish something. It's all about observation, not about guessing and putting your hypothesis out as fact. Okay, so the discipline that maintains the standards of science, the discipline, has its existence in a specializing community, in this case the scientists, or in the other example, the judges, okay, the specializing community. The intellectual, hold on one sec, let me turn off the phone. Where is that phone? Sorry about that. Okay, so, where were we? The discipline that maintains the standards of science has its existence in a specializing community, the intellectual devotion of which is a special and professional morality. So, it is especially heinous. Heinous means very bad, very morally reprehensible. It is especially heinous and morally reprehensible for a scientist to falsify research. That is a professional morality that scientists are supposed to be devoted to. Okay? Every community has its own personal morality where some infractions are particularly bad. Infractions. Okay, so the intellectual devotion to the disciplines that hold science together are a professional and special morality. It doesn't really affect everybody else. It's especially dear to the scientists, for example. But Andreski would do well to ponder this. Do well to means he should ponder this. He would do well to. He needs to ponder, which means think deeply about this. The professional morality, the standards, what makes those standards, what brings them into existence and keeps them in existence. Okay, I quote again from Marjorie Green. It seems to me an unquestionable truth. Okay, he believes the following quote is unquestionably true. No discipline, however factual, however detached, can come into being or remain in existence except insofar as the fundamental evaluative acts of the individuals belonging to a given culture have legislated into existence and maintain in existence the area of free inquiry and of mutual confirmation or falsification which such inquiry demands. So, no discipline. So we'll consider our example of science. Okay, so no discipline, such as science. However factual, however detached. Now everybody would agree that science is supposedly very factual, very detached, not subjective, not subject to my opinion or your opinion. The facts are the facts. But she's saying that no discipline, however factual, can come into being or remain in existence except insofar as the fundamental evaluative acts of the individuals belonging to a given culture have legislated into existence and maintain in existence the area of free inquiry and of mutual confirmation or falsification which such inquiry demands. I don't want to try to take this apart word by word. I want to tell you what it's conjuring in my mind. Some people might say, science stands for itself. The facts stand for themselves. They speak for themselves. No one needs to prove scientific facts. They are self-evident. Marjorie Green would say that is not true. She would say that even the discipline of science requires a community of people who, by their mutual agreement, they define the boundaries of inquiry. So we have these Cartesian dualists who say science only deals with that can be measured. Okay, only with that which we can materially deal with. They have set off boundaries, and they've said it is not proper for scientists to consider metaphysics or the existence of ghosts or the existence of God or the supernatural or angels or even the details of what goes on inside the head of an individual. All of that is subjective. It doesn't matter. We deal with objective reality that you can weigh and you can define. Okay? So, there is a community of people who have defined, they have legislated, they have just arbitrarily said, this is our area of inquiry. And they have agreed upon, mutually confirmed, their standards of what constitutes proof or falsehood within their field. So, in the field of science, you have got to have repeatable experimental proof. It's got to be repeated. It's got to be able to be demonstrated with extra variables taken out so you can clearly show causal relationships, and then it's got to be documented. All of this must happen before you can establish a truth within the discipline of science. In other specializing communities, there are other standards. Every community has its own protocol, and it's decided upon and legislated by the group. And then the group evaluates whether it's true or false. For example, my family is a specialized group on someone's birthday, and we all sit around the table, and we all say what we like or love about the individual, and then the group judges if our comment is acceptable or unacceptable. It's by mutual confirmation that we say, yes, this individual is sincere. They really mean what they're saying. Or, no, this individual is BSing us. BS. I'm not going to tell you what BS is, because it's profane. But BSing is giving us, maybe Alessandro can tell you in Portuguese what would be an equivalent. But if the individual is saying, I love Margarita because she can haul rocks, that's BS. So the specializing community judges. And by mutual creative agreement, we set up the rules. And somehow we all know what they are. And somehow we all can agree on the thumbs up or the thumbs down. So, all disciplines are this way. However factual they claim to be, as science claims to be, yet still they have invisible standards which cannot be measured, and everybody agrees on them, and it's by mutual consent and collaboration. And they are in a culture. So the culture brings into existence all of this structure of cooperation and maintains it in existence. Okay? So, we're running out of time here. I'll tell you what, let me read the next paragraph. And then I think we'll stop for questions and start next time. So let's get the idea just by reading, and then we'll go into it and discuss it more next time. Okay, Alessandro, sound good? Okay, I'm going to just read the next little bit so that we know where we're going. Marjorie Green doesn't make in any way the point that, for my purpose, I need now to make, but it is implicit in the sentence I quoted in order to make it. It is there in the phrase, the fundamental evaluative acts of the individuals belonging to a given culture. A culture is a community in the sense in which I used the word a few sentences back, and the force of the last quoted sentence is that the community, constituted by the acceptance and maintenance of the discipline upon which science depends, belongs of its nature to a more inclusive community, which, having produced it, encloses it. So that's where we're going. We'll have no trouble understanding that next week. And if you have any questions right now, send them in, and I'll come back in 5 minutes to, if you have anything to ask, we'll answer it, and then say goodbye. Okay, we did have a couple of comments and a question. The one comment I wanted to reply to is Mary Elena said she was sad about sending the poem, not realizing that I was in the midst of a loss. And I want to say, I'm glad you sent the poem. It's good for things to trigger with that which is important in our hearts. And, you know, I can be set off by anything these days. So, anyway, send in literature. I really like reading it. There was a question about how you divide a word when you get to the end of a line and a piece of paper. So, for example, supposing you have a piece of paper like this, you know, Okay, so we're talking about handwriting, and you get to the end of a line. And how do you divide the word? Is there a rule? There are several rules. Okay. One rule in general is that if you can avoid dividing, avoid it. So, for example, if you have a long word, like well, we'll say, I'll just use the word watch. Okay, I watched television last night. And I came to the end, and it was, I watch ED, television. That would be bad. You wouldn't do that. Because, for one thing, this is so small that you could almost squeeze it in. So you try not to divide. And you never divide a small part. There was a funny thing that happened to my mother. She received a letter from my niece, when the child was just learning to write. And the child wrote a letter that went on, it was a piece of paper like this, very long. And the child wrote, ran out of space. And on the other side of the paper, she just wrote the last letter, D. That's all. And it turned out that she had had a word like watched. It was very funny. You never do that. So, if you're going to divide a word, you should try to divide it in the middle with a substantial portion on the other side. It is okay to have a small portion at the beginning. So, from the beginning. So, supposing you were writing the word instantaneous, and you came to the end of the line, you could say instantaneous, and that would be okay. Instantaneous. So a little bit in the front is okay, but only 2 letters, ed, in the end is not okay. Okay? So it's all right to use a small amount at the beginning. Okay? Another rule is you must always break in between syllables. So, we have different types of syllables. Syllables always go with vowel sounds. So let's look at the word instantaneous. 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 In the dictionary, they will always break up the word into syllables for you, and you can break your word at any established break. You would never separate here, for example. You would not separate either here or here. In other words, you do not break up a syllable. You would never, of course, separate here or here. You never break a syllable. So you always must break in between syllables. Now, we have syllables that are consonant, vowel, consonant. That's the most common. So that would be this: consonant, vowel, consonant. Consonant, vowel, consonant. Okay? We also have vowel, consonant. We have single vowels. And then it's pretty common also to have consonant, vowel. So basically, you just have to look in the dictionary to find where the vowels, where the syllables and split in between syllables. That's all you can do. So, hope that answers your question. Anything else before we stop, Alessandro?
Last check.
Last check.
Marilena says that you're a very cute person.
Who said that?
Marilena.
Oh, thank you, Marilena. Is that it? Okay, you're probably a very cute person too. All right, see you later. Bye-bye. Next week, read the book.